I never imagined I'd spend my 72nd birthday eating grocery store cake alone. Not because I didn't have family. I had 3 children, a beautiful house, a successful business I'd spent 45 years building from the ground up, and more money than I'd ever dreamed of when I was a young mechanic working 12-hour shifts just to afford diapers. But somewhere along the way, my children stopped seeing me as their father. They started seeing me as an inheritance. My name is Richard Coleman, and this is how one signature changed everything. My wife, Susan, passed away 6 years ago after battling cancer. Those were the hardest months of my life. She wasn't just my wife. She was my partner, the one person who always reminded our children that respect wasn't optional. When she died, the glue holding this family together disappeared. At first, everyone visited. Emily brought flowers. Jason called every weekend. Nicole insisted I come over for Sunday dinners. I thought Susan would be proud. Then the visits slowly became shorter. The phone calls became rarer. Eventually, every conversation somehow ended with money. Dad, have you thought about downsizing? Dad, that house is way too big. Dad, maintaining the business must be exhausting. Each sentence sounded caring, until I realized every suggestion involved selling something. Selling the house, selling the company, liquidating investments. They weren't worried about my workload. They were calculating what would eventually become theirs. I ignored the feeling. No father wants to believe his own children are counting the days until he's gone. One Sunday, Emily invited everyone over for dinner. I thought it would be nice for the whole family to get together, she said. I smiled. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Maybe I'd been imagining things. Maybe grief had made me suspicious. Dinner was wonderful. The grandchildren laughed. Jason grilled steaks. Nicole brought Susan's favorite apple pie. For one evening, it felt like we were a family again. Then dessert arrived. Emily cleared her throat. Dad, there's actually something we wanted to discuss. Every instinct in my body tightened. Jason leaned forward. We've been talking. Nicole nodded. And we all agree. Whenever siblings suddenly agree on something involving money, nothing good follows. Emily smiled the way real estate agents smile before showing you the expensive house. We think it's time to update your estate plan. There it was. Not how are you? Not are you happy? My estate plan. I set my fork down. My lawyer and I review it every few years. Jason chuckled. Exactly. It's probably outdated. Nicole pulled out a folder. An actual folder. Prepared. Organized. Inside were printed documents. Emily slid them toward me. We had an attorney look everything over. I blinked. You hired an attorney? Oh, just for advice. Without asking me. Without telling me. Jason pointed at one page. This structure would reduce probate. Emily added quickly. It's better for everyone. Everyone. Meaning them. Not me. I looked around the table. Nobody seemed embarrassed. Nobody seemed ashamed. They planned this. Dinner wasn't about family. It was an intervention. For my money. The following week, I visited my attorney, Martin Hughes. He'd handled my business for 30 years. When I placed the documents on his desk, he didn't even finish reading before sighing. Your children prepared these? They hired another lawyer. Martin leaned back. Richard, he removed his glasses. I've seen this before. What do you mean? Families become very different once significant assets are involved. I stared out his office window. I kept thinking I was imagining it. No, they're treating me differently. Yes. The word hurt more than I expected. Martin folded his hands. What do you want to do? I laughed bitterly. I want my kids back. He stayed silent. Lawyers know when honesty is kinder than false hope. A month later, Jason called. Dad, quick question. Here we go. Sure. Have you decided about those estate documents? No. Silence. Then, well, you really should. Why? It just makes things easier. For who? Another pause. Everyone. Always everyone. Never me. Over the next several weeks, something strange happened. The more I delayed signing their paperwork, the nicer they became. Emily suddenly called every Tuesday. Nicole sent meals. Jason offered to mow my lawn. If I'd been blind, I'd have thought I was Father of the Year. Instead, I realized something heartbreaking. Their kindness had a deadline. It ended the moment I signed. One afternoon, I forgot my reading glasses and drove back to the office unexpectedly. I wasn't supposed to be there. The conference room door was open. Inside were Jason and my financial manager, Brian. Brian looked uncomfortable. Jason didn't. "I'll be taking over eventually," Jason said. Brian frowned. "Your father hasn't said that." Jason laughed confidently. "He doesn't have to. It's basically already decided." I froze. Brian noticed me first. His face turned white. Jason slowly turned around. "Dad." The room fell silent. I walked inside. "What exactly is already decided?" Jason smiled nervously. "I just meant—" "You meant what?" He looked trapped. "The company will eventually stay in the family." I stared at him. "You've already given yourself my job." "No." "You just did." Brian quietly excused himself. Now it was just the two of us. Jason sighed dramatically. "Dad, you're overreacting." "Overreacting." After hearing my own son discuss my business like I was already dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into my study. Susan's picture sat beside the fireplace. I picked it up. "You always saw things before I did." Her smile hadn't changed. Mine had. I failed them. Tears filled my eyes. I gave them everything. Private schools, cars, college, down payments for homes, interest-free loans, vacations, wedding expenses. Whenever life knocked them down, I caught them. Maybe that had been the mistake. I never taught them gratitude, only expectation. The next morning, I called Martin. "I've made a decision." "I thought you might. I want to rewrite everything." He didn't sound surprised. "Everything? Everything? And who do you want your estate to go to instead?" I looked around my office, at the employees who had stayed loyal for decades, at the scholarship letters from students I'd quietly helped through college, at the charity requests sitting unanswered on my desk. Then I smiled for the first time in months. "I have a better idea." Martin chuckled. "I'll prepare the paperwork." 3 weeks later, every document was signed, every page notarized, every legal requirement completed. One signature, one decision, one completely different future. My children still believed they had inherited millions. They had no idea that a single document had quietly erased every expectation they'd spent years building. And they wouldn't discover the truth until the day they believed they had finally won. 3 months passed after I signed the new estate documents. I didn't tell my children. I didn't hint at it. I simply watched. For the first time in years, I stopped chasing their affection. No more paying for surprise expenses. No more writing checks whenever one of them fell on hard times. No more fixing problems they should have solved themselves. The change was almost immediate. Emily's Tuesday phone calls disappeared. Nicole suddenly became too busy with the kids. Jason stopped dropping by the office. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. The kindness I had mistaken for love had been nothing more than an investment. Once they realized I wasn't making changes on their schedule, they lost interest. It hurt, but strangely, it also brought peace. At least I finally knew the truth. Life became quieter. Instead of sitting alone wondering why my children never visited, I started living again. I volunteered at the community workshop, teaching teenagers basic woodworking. Many of those kids came from broken homes. Some had never had anyone encourage them. Watching a 16-year-old proudly build his first table reminded me of Jason at that age. Back then, my son had been curious, hardworking, and kind. I often wondered where that young man had gone. One afternoon, a young apprentice named Daniel stayed behind after class. "Mr. Coleman," he said nervously, "I got accepted into engineering school." I smiled. "That's wonderful. I couldn't have done it without you." He hugged me, not because he wanted anything, not because he expected money, simply because he was grateful. That hug meant more than all the forced birthday dinners my children had arranged in the last 5 years. Martin called a few weeks later. "Everything is finalized." "Good. You should know something." "What?" "Your old will has been requested." "Requested?" "Yes." "By whom?" "Emily's attorney." I laughed quietly. "They're checking." "It appears so. They're making sure they're still getting everything." Martin sighed. "I've been practicing law for 38 years. And I've never seen children so interested in paperwork while their father is still alive." Neither had I. Then came Thanksgiving. Emily insisted on hosting. Dad, everyone misses you. Those words would have melted my heart a year earlier. Now they sounded rehearsed. Still, I went. The house looked beautiful. Turkey, candles, smiling grandchildren. For a few hours, everything seemed normal, until dinner ended. Jason lifted a glass. Dad, you've always taught us to think ahead. I already knew where this was going. Emily exchanged a glance with Nicole. We've been discussing the future. Of course they had. Jason smiled. We thought maybe it's time to retire. I'm not retired. You could be. Nicole jumped in. You deserve to enjoy life. Emily added, Jason can run the company. I looked directly at my son. Can he? He nodded confidently. I've basically been preparing. That was interesting, considering no one had asked me. I calmly sipped my coffee. And where exactly have you been preparing? Jason frowned. Well, the office. He hesitated. No. The factory? No. The client meetings? Silence. The truth was obvious. He wasn't preparing to run the company. He was preparing to own it. Those are two very different things. A month later, I made the biggest announcement of my life. The company was celebrating its 50th anniversary. Every employee was invited. Suppliers, business partners, community leaders, even my children. Nearly 300 people filled the banquet hall. Everyone expected a speech about retirement. Instead, I stepped onto the stage with Martin beside me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began. This company has been my life's work. Applause filled the room. But no business belongs to one person forever. Jason straightened in his chair. Emily smiled confidently. Nicole squeezed her husband's hand. They looked excited. Martin handed me a folder. I've spent months deciding what should happen next. Jason could barely hide his grin. I've reached my decision. The room became silent. I am establishing the Susan Coleman Foundation. People exchanged confused looks. The foundation will provide scholarships, vocational training, emergency housing assistance, and financial support for hardworking families in our community. The audience applauded warmly. My children didn't. They looked confused. I continued. 80% of my personal fortune. Jason's smile widened. Will permanently fund the foundation. His smile disappeared. Emily's face turned pale. Nicole whispered, What? The company itself will become employee-owned over the next 5 years. The room erupted into applause. Several longtime employees wiped away tears. Brian stood with his hands covering his face. He'd worked beside me for 32 years. He never expected this. Neither had anyone else. I looked toward my children. Shock had replaced confidence. Jason stood up. Dad. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. The room became quiet again. My remaining estate will be divided equally among my grandchildren in protected educational trusts. Nicole gasped. Emily looked like she couldn't breathe. Jason's voice cracked. What about us? Every head in the ballroom turned toward him. I answered calmly. You already received your inheritance. His eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I paid for your education. I bought your first homes. I financed your businesses. I paid your debts. I gave each of you opportunities most people only dream about. Silence. I believed that was my responsibility as your father. I paused, but I refused to reward entitlement. No one moved. No one even picked up a fork. I wanted my legacy to create opportunity. I looked around the room at the employees who had spent decades helping build the company. Not expectation. The applause started slowly, then grew louder. Within seconds, nearly the entire room was standing. Not for my money, for the decision. Jason stormed toward the stage. You can't do this. Martin calmly stepped between us. I assure you, he said, he absolutely can. Emily's voice trembled. We're your children. Yes. You owe us. The words hung in the air. Several employees looked away in embarrassment. I smiled sadly. There it is. What? The sentence that explains everything. Emily realized too late what she'd said. You believe being my children entitled you to everything I built. Nicole burst into tears. Dad, please. I walked down from the stage. I spent years waiting for one of you to ask how I was doing. None of them spoke. Instead, Every conversation eventually became about my will. Jason stared at the floor. You stopped seeing me as your father. I looked each of them in the eyes. You started seeing me as a bank account. The months that followed weren't easy. Jason threatened lawsuits. Every attorney he contacted gave him the same answer. The documents were airtight. Emily stopped speaking to me entirely. Nicole sent several emotional letters apologizing. Not for expecting the money, for losing me. There was a difference. I invited her for coffee. For the first time in years, we talked without mentioning finances. She admitted she'd allowed herself to follow the others. She cried. I cried too. Healing takes honesty. Not everyone is willing to face it. 5 years later, I attended the Susan Coleman Foundation's annual scholarship ceremony. More than 400 students had received scholarships. Dozens of families had avoided homelessness. Hundreds of apprentices had learned skilled trades. The employee-owned company was more successful than ever. Daniel, the nervous apprentice who had hugged me years earlier, returned as a mechanical engineer. He shook my hand and smiled. You changed my life. Those words were worth more than any fortune. As I left the ceremony, I noticed several grandchildren running toward me. Grandpa! They wrapped their arms around me without asking for anything. No questions about money. No discussions about inheritance. Just hugs. Real hugs. In that moment, I realized something I wished I had understood years earlier. A fortune isn't measured by what your children inherit. It's measured by the values they carry forward. Money can build houses. It can buy businesses. It can fill bank accounts. But character? Character is the only inheritance that truly lasts. As I looked up at the evening sky, I imagined Susan smiling. For the first time since losing her, I smiled back, because everything my children thought would fall apart had actually fallen into place.